Can you guys hear me?
We can.
Okay, good.
Remember, like Bob Clark and Doug Campbell?
Rob Clark and Joe Bordelli.
Watch the debate. I'm so tired of people saying, oh, did you watch the debate? You know what you could debate, dude? You could debate these nuts. Ha! God, I'm...
Section 107 of the Fair Use Act of 1976 provides protection to use copyrighted material for research, analysis, education, and commentary purposes. We here at Loose Moose Productions reserve that right. Now, on with the show. Here's Joe B. and the Triple B. Hey, Aunt Udine, how's things in Texas?
Everything is going to hell down here in Texas.
Hands on Joey and Joey, Joey and the Triple B, baby, Triple B and Joey, rock on and Joe Morelli, Triple B and Joey, Joey and the Triple B, baby, Triple B and Joey, rock on and Joe Morelli. We're coming in, only seeking the truth about JFK. Here's the long-going podcast crew, and here we go.
And ladies and gentlemen, here we go.
Yes, here we go. We're off to a good start again this week. We have with us our guest this evening, author and professor John Koerner. Welcome to the show, John.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. I like the picture you guys got with that cannon there. That's pretty cool. I like that one. That's at Fort George in Ontario, by the way. That was a fun place to visit if you ever get a chance to go up there.
Awesome. Yeah, I Googled you and I found a couple pictures, but I thought that was the coolest one. Anything with a gun is always cooler than anything without
Right,
it.
yeah. Right. I was like, I got my sunglasses on. I'm looking pretty cool. So I was like, that's a nice shot. Thanks for picking that out for me. I like that. Thanks.
Yeah, man, no problem. Thanks for hanging out with us. I know you reached out to me a little bit ago and you had this book coming out. It is called The Four Guns, The Stolen History of the Assassinated Presidents. And if you could, John, just let everybody know about yourself and what spurred you to write this book.
Well, U.S. history teacher here in Buffalo, past about 20 years or so. And when I teach history, I always try to focus on artifacts. I think textbooks are, they're kind of boring, I guess you could say. But artifacts, I think, are a good way to kind of focus on the actual way people, guns are, I think, important because of these four guns, especially, to change history. And my personal story, just quickly how I got this idea of doing the book. My grandfather, he served in World War II, and he was a hero from the war. He got a Silver Star for a mine sweeping position. Pretty cool stuff. So he brought home with him his training rifle, binoculars, and all kinds of other things from the war. And I was like, well, that kind of inspired me to write a book about what I thought would be like the most important guns in history that would change the course of our country's history. And I said, well, what would they be? Well, I guess it would be, Lincoln, Garfield, McKinley, and Kennedy. And the book itself, it talks about like what the guns are, how the assassins acquired them, also like how history would have been different if they survived the assassinations. And also, and another way to look at this too, the Secret Service in many ways, every single time they pretty much messed up and could have changed history just by doing just basic protection for a president. So that's essentially what the book is about in like a thumbnail sketch.
Well, I think like when Abraham Lincoln was president, I mean, this was, so far long ago.
Mm-hmm.
Did he really even have a Secret Service protecting him at that time? I always hear these stories about, that he would just walk around and, without protection all the time. But I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, I mean, it was more informal then. He had detectives that guarded him, and he had agents that were. That night, John Parker was the one that was assigned to protect Lincoln, and Parker decides that he would rather go drinking in the bar next door and watch the show, and Lincoln was completely unprotected at the time of the assassination. So you're right, it was more informal, but there was an agent that was supposed to guard him, but he completely did not do his job and left the booth completely open for Booth to go in and shoot Lincoln.
Yeah, that whole thing still amazes me. That the whole story, you know, this pretty famous actor for the time would actually do this in the middle of a performance. You know, it's like it's unheard of, you know, for something like that to happen now. But if you could just walk us through the first gun, and Joe, if you got that picture, pop it up and show everybody what this thing
and
like.
yeah, and hi, John. I didn't get a chance to say hi, and we didn't really get a chance to talk before the show. But I have read the whole book, and I have some pointed questions on each chapter. I thought it was great, and I was really intrigued. I really knew nothing.
Oh, thanks.
Almost nothing about Garfield and McKinley. I knew a little bit about the Lincoln assassination, but not much. But wow, is it intriguing. And I think this is the picture from the Ford Theater's exhibit, right? Don't they? Do they have it? I think you mentioned in your book they have it in like the basement, kind of in the corner. And I believe on the handle is John Wilkes Booth's name is on there, right? And like a little,
yes,
whatever it's called.
Yeah, I actually took that picture. So, yeah, when I visited
great.
So,
yeah,
a couple of things I could. So, if you go to Ford's Theater and you take the tour, and I've done this, I guess maybe 3 or 4 times. There is 2 things they're not going to tell you about what happened that night that I talk about in the book. So one thing is that night Booth was actually carrying 2 guns with him. One, they both were Derringers. And the reason he did this was because it's a single shot, as you can see, and it could misfire. So if he had the other gun with him, there's a backup gun he can fire at the president in case the gun didn't work. So what ends up happening, he shoots Lincoln. He drops that gun in the box. He then stabs Major Rathbun with a knife, leaps off of the stage, and then yells into the crowd, "Sic Semper Tyrannis," drops the other gun on the stage and goes out the back door. So they don't even tell you this. When you take the tour at Ford's Theater, they had 2 guns there that night. And it wasn't until much later they actually found out which gun was the one that actually shot Lincoln. The first one that he drops in the theater up in the booth is the one he used. The other one he didn't, of course, use was found later on by a stagehand because it was still loaded. That one is actually Ripley's Arnott Museum in St. Augustine, Florida, and they have it there in that museum. So they don't even tell you that he was actually armed with 2 different guns there that night. One was dropped in the box, the other one was dropped on the stage, and the one that they have, there in the museum, you can actually, you can see on display. And the other thing, the other thing that is a bit more of a longer story, but I can get into this a little bit, is they don't ever tell you where or when Booth bought the guns. And I've read every single book that has written about the Booth, assassination in Lincoln. And the basic question of when and where did he buy these guns has never been answered. So my book goes into this. You probably read the section about this. I just kind of really summarize what I found out. So you go up to the point where it's January 1865, and he's bought some guns there's a plot to kidnap Lincoln he's involved with. He bought a number of different guns. You actually can see some of that Ford's Theater actually behind that display case. The Derringer is on one side, other guns are on the other side. So we know that up until then, no Derringers that he bought. So once we get to February of 1865, it's close to the assassination. He's already determined he's going to shoot the president. He needs the guns. The question is, when would he ever get it? Right, goes to Philadelphia.
To this family to almost see goodbye.
Right, exactly right. Yeah, because his sister Asia lives there, and we know you saw put the gun up a second. If you want to put the picture up again, you can see on the gun it says Philadelphia on the gun. So he bought the guns in Philadelphia, And we know that the guns were bought in pairs. And the question is, when was the last time he was in Philadelphia before the assassination? It was February 10th, 11th, and 12th, 1865. And we know that the next day he goes to New York City. His brother's right that he's in a great mood. He's very happy. The weekend he was actually doing some things, wrapped some things up with his family. He gave his sisters some stock certificates. He wrote 2 letters to the media, one to his mother, one to the media, to say what he was doing. He was saying goodbye to his family that weekend. He was wrapping some things up. So I think that weekend he would have probably bought the guns. And the final thing that kind of, I think, seals the deal is that February 12th was Lincoln's 56th birthday. So I think he wanted to do this symbolically, to buy the gun on his birthday. He loved symbolism.
Yeah, he did.
He loved that kind of thing. So I think that weekend on the 12th, he bought the guns in Philadelphia, and he goes to shoot the president, in April, just after that. And I also mentioned in the book that laugh about this stuff. He thought it was very funny, but right down the street from Asia's house is a gun dealership, and the owner is Abraham Peterman, who was the name of the gun dealer. So I think he would have loved to buy a gun Lincoln's birthday with a gun owner named Abraham Peterman, and he would have laughed all the way home back to Asia's house. So I think my best guess is that's when he bought the guns, February 12th, Lincoln's 56th birthday in Philadelphia, at that shop near Asia's house. And that's my best guess in terms of when he bought the guns.
Yeah, I read that part and it was very intriguing. But I actually had a question, because I think you mentioned, so these Derringers were so small that they were sold in pairs, right? So the one I just showed would have, in theory, been sold as 2, right? Because they were so small, maybe if one misfired.
Right.
But the one we just showed, which is in the Ford Museum, that was found in the presidential suite where Lincoln was killed, was a 44 caliber. And the one that is at the Ripley's place, I think Gifford was the who worked. Am I pronouncing that right? Gifford,
right.
Who worked at the Ford Theater, who found the gun somewhere near the stage the next day, but didn't really, was kind of scared to come out with it as a fear he would be considered a co-conspirator. So kind of kept it. And you go through the whole chain of evidence, and it's very interesting. But what I want to ask is was it normal for 2 guns that were sold in a pair to be different calibers?
Yeah, I think what was happening was that a lot of different Derringers that they were producing. And when Booth bought the guns, he probably looked at them, maybe test fired them, and took the gun that was more reliable with a better caliber and used that one to shoot the president. I think that would why he would have used the other one and not that one. And I think when they were producing the Derringers, they wanted to get them, because it's such a single shot weapon, they felt that if you bought 2, it'd be, in case one misfires, you want to buy the other gun just in case you have a backup gun. I guess it's important.
Or if one didn't get the job done.
Yeah, I think that would be the way they would have done that.
Yeah, or if you needed to shoot someone like Major Rathbone, right, who was in the suite with Lincoln, or like you said, to fight his way out, possibly. Of course. Yeah,
I think he had. He needed a. The thing is with thinking about this, like if Agent Parker was doing his job, he could have, the way it would have went down, if the agent was there, he would have brought Booth into the box. Lincoln would have probably stood up to greet Booth, and would have at least maybe got shot in the chest, not the head shot. It would have been different. It would have seen the gun. So without Agent Parker there's no chance to stop the assassination. So he probably would have introduced Booth, brought him into the box, saw the gun maybe. It would have changed the whole dynamic of what happened. And he had 2 guns, maybe one to shoot Secret Service agent, one to shoot Lincoln. But he was prepared for those, I guess, contingency plans. But they didn't even tell you that. They never even tell you he had 2 guns or whether he bought the guns. No idea. They have no idea where those things happen. So now you go with 4th. You can be much smarter now. They've read my book.
And I just wanted to say, to follow up on Rob's question. So John Wilkes Booth Can you give like an analogy of how famous he was back then? Was it like I've heard like a Leonardo DiCaprio, like what Brad Pitt, like one of the top level actors, right? And of course, they weren't actors on the screen; they were in plays. Is that correct or not correct?
Oh, it's definitely correct. He had he started off, one of his major acting careers was in Albany. In fact, it's kind of interesting. I start the book off this way, where it's in February of 1861, and Lincoln is visiting Albany as president-elect, and there is John Wilkes Booth in the crowd watching him coming down the street. He was acting in Albany that year. And Rathbone is there too. His wife is also in the crowd. It's very unusual. All these men who meet each other, they're all there in the crowd in 1861. He also goes, he acts in Philadelphia for a number of years, and he always gets great reviews. He actually comes from an acting family. His brother Junius was an actor. So he has a lot of background as an actor. Think about his acting career, by the way. He also was agent of the Confederate Secret Service. So he was able to use that as a cover to go different places and get reports back to the government's kidnapping plot that he took part in. So it was like a cover story he could use for his acting career to be also involved with secret plots to kidnap Lincoln and eventually kill him.
Yeah, and sorry, Rob, I want to follow up. So that's one of the most interesting things I learned on the Lincoln chapter was that John Wilkes Booth was part of the Confederate Secret Service, the CSS. And it's not a secret service as we would think about it today. I think it's more like a covert operating, like CIA type of thing, right? He was traveling. He used, like you said, he used his actor profession as a cover to travel to Canada, where he met with British officers, I believe you mentioned, and had a lot of support from that network, right?
Yeah, he definitely did. I mean, you have this one thing about Booth that's interesting is he's so charismatic. Women fall in love with him, and they just do whatever he wants. And one try to stab him to death. He calmed her down in Albany, and then he's got this action as an actor. He does go to St. Lawrence Hotel, meets with some agents of the British government. He also has this kidnapping plot to kill Lincoln, the kidnap Lincoln in 1864. Lincoln never shows up on the route. He would have got him if he showed up. But yeah, it's all linked back to the government of the Confederacy. When we can prove this is that after he leaves the assassination scene at Forest Theater, he goes down and every step of the way, he's meeting with other agents of the Confederate Secret Service, taking him back to safety to Richmond, including Mudd, who resets his leg. So it does seem like the whole thing was planned as a last effort to revive the war effort to save the Confederacy. Part of the assassination was actually part of the plot to do that.
Now, was this the same thing as like Knights of the Golden Circle, or is this something totally different?
Well, this was formed pretty early on in the war. And the idea was initially to run information back and forth between Canada and to trying to get the British into the war as allies. And then later on to run like money and guns and information from the northern states, from sympathizers from the north. Then it worked into this other agency that was meant just to kill Lincoln and kidnap him. So it was all traced back to Jefferson Davis. And one thing that ends up taking place that does change this, Dahlgren raid happens in 1864, plot to kill Jefferson Davis. And they say, we're going to kill our president. We're going to kill you too. So that happens. Lincoln authorizes that Dahlgren raid. And after that, they say, well, you're going to kill us. We're going to kill you too. So there's a lot of retribution, anger on both sides. And Booth is tied up in all these different things.
And like with many of these presidential assassinations and even other assassinations, there's always a conspiracy angle involved somehow, you know? And I think the big one is, what are your feelings on, did Booth die that day at the farm, or was he able to escape somehow and go on to live a nice long life?
Have you read a little bit about this? Because one thing that the person who shoots him doesn't identify him completely, doesn't really see him directly. So It's possible that he did escape, but I think he. Have you read more about this? Do you have an opinion on it?
I've just, heard like different things. I know, what was that one show that you've been on? It was Brad Meltzer's show.
Mm-hmm.
What was that show called? It's very good. God, the name's escaping me right now.
I forgot to. I'm sorry.
I know that's terrible. I put it in the description of this video because I think it was part of your bio, but I can't see that right now. But anyway, I think he devoted one of his episodes to. I think the family was wanting to exhume his grave and do like DNA testing once and for all, kind of figure out if it was really Booth in the grave or if he had, you hear this stuff, like
with Oswald.
Well, you've heard it with Oswald too, but people like a lot of these Western gunfighter types like Jesse James and what was that one kid? Billy the Kid, that they escaped death and went on to live long lives, and people have claimed to be them later on in life, and they've got some kind of proof. Whether or not it's all believable or not, I don't know. But I just heard that possibly the same thing had happened with Booth, given the network of things that he had going on, and that of course, forensics aren't what they are. That forensics aren't. Or weren't back then what they are now, if I can get that out of my mouth correctly. As far as being able to identify people, with certainty, this is like pre fingerprints even, and not a lot of photos existed of people. But of course, like with him being so famous, it would be hard to, unless you had an identical or a doppelganger or something, to be able to pull something like that off with a guy that famous. But I just didn't know your thoughts on that.
Well, one thing that I can mention is he did have a lot of help. People could have planned for this because there was many people that were waiting for him on the escape route. So if the people involved with the plot to get him out of harm's way, I think it was possible that if they had this planned, he did have some help. They could have escaped. One thing about Oswald too, we mentioned the idea about Oswald being exhumed. There's an interesting story about his exhumation. So when they took his body out of the grave, this was about, I think, maybe 20 years later, the person who did the autopsy, he looked at Oswald's brain and he said, "This is not the same brain," because the person that he did the autopsy for, he did a craniotomy, and the person in the grave had an intact skull. So he said, "This is not the same person he did the autopsy with, because he did it himself and he took the skull cap off, and this person, whoever was in the grave, was not the same body." So isn't that crazy? That's just right from the man who did the autopsy. He said, "This isn't the same one." Doesn't know who he was.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, I think I haven't really dove that deep into the Oswald exhumation. Maybe that's something we need to do in the future, Joe.
Yeah,
to check out. I know they try to explain it away as it being just damage that occurred over time and a crappy vault and in the coffin, and I think they said his maybe his lower jaw had been put onto a different skull so his teeth would match. And I think he had surgery somewhere on the back of his skull or back behind his ear when he was younger, and then that wasn't present. So yeah, that might be a good idea for a future show, Joe.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, and before we move on from Lincoln, I had one more question. So I think one of the things you had said, so the CSS, which of course the Confederate Secret Service, what answered only or directly to Jefferson Davis.
That's
Is
right.
that true? So you kind of like indicated that the plot to kidnap Kennedy and then later kill him actually came from the highest levels of the Confederate government, which of course would fit the definition of.
I mean, Lincoln, not Kennedy.
Lincoln.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes.
They didn't kidnap Kennedy.
Yeah, I'll get confused once or twice more, I'm sure. But
That's okay. There are a lot of similarities, but that's not one of them. Yeah.
There's
There
a
were
big thing. They say,
coincidences.
Kennedy was killed in a Lincoln. Lincoln
Yeah.
was killed, in a Ford theater.
Right.
the
Yeah. We can
secretaries,
add that
right?
one to it.
Yeah.
The secretary thing, and
Yeah.
Johnson, and
So
let's
then
do-
the next.
Oh, go ahead, Joe.
Go ahead, Joe.
I was just going to do the segue there. So the next segment, of course, goes into President Garfield, who was a Civil War hero and was shot and later died. Although I didn't realize it was a couple months after he was shot by Charles. I'm going to get this wrong. Guiteau.
Yeah.
Guiteau.
Charles Guiteau. Mhm.
Why would anybody want to shoot President Garfield?
Well, why would they want to do this? So, Garfield was, as you were saying, he was just a Civil War hero and just an amazing president. Would have been anyway. So, Charles Guiteau was the official version of events is that he's this deranged office seeker that attempts several times to get a job in the White House, gets disillusioned, and then ends up killing the president. He shoots him on July 2nd of 1881. But I did put this in the book that there is this unusual thing that takes place about 3 days before the assassination, where a visitor to the president goes to the White House and he leaves the White House and he tells the agent guarding the White House to watch out because someone wants to kill the president. And just be unaware that there's a plot afoot. He's doing a lot of unusual things, a lot of things to change things. So be aware there's a plot afoot. And 3 days later, Garfield is of course assassinated. Dies, of course, later on in September. But that little story there was shared, and I put this in my book too, just to kind of indicate that, like you were saying, who would want to kill this president? He's making some changes. He was trying to heal the Republican Party at the time, and he was trying to be a leader for civil rights too, and bring back Reconstruction. And he was doing a lot of important things that were never really had been done at that point in time. He probably would have been a really great leader for our country, but sadly he gets shot on July 2nd, 1881. I'm going to mention an interesting thing about this assassination and McKinley one too. Both of the presidents could have survived this if the assassin loaded the gun differently. So the first shot misses Garfield completely. The gun misfires. And then the second shot hits him and kills him. And later on, after they confiscate the gun is given to, this is my favorite name, G.W. McElfresh. That's the guy's name. Right out of Old School. So that's a detective's name. Sorry, I shouldn't laugh. But G.W. McElfresh, he has the gun, and he says, he notices that, the first bullet missed. So he gives the gun to the U.S. Army, this for caliber British Bulldog. It's got 5 chambers. Yeah, there you go.
Is this?
That's it. Yeah, so it's got
Did it
5
have an
bullets
ivory?
in it.
Did it have an ivory handle as well? I believe you
Right.
mentioned. Yeah.
So the Army gets the gun. McElfresh says, do some testing on it. And they find out that the rest of the bullets were defective of their gunpowder load. There was only one good bullet in the entire chamber that ended up killing Garfield. So if he had loaded the ammunition in a different order, it would have misfired and never would have killed the president. So we have here at the time, gunpowder and ammunition was not reliable. So just by some dumb luck, he ends up picking the other one good bullet in the second part of the chamber that was a kill shot for Garfield. So we have this with the British Bulldog revolver. The ammunition here, part of it was defective, according to analysis by the U.S. Army that they gave back to McElfresh.
Yeah, and that is crazy because I think you mentioned in the book it held 5 shots, right?
Right.
And one of them, which would be the second shot fired at Garfield, was the one that hit him in his back,
Mm-hmm.
right? The
Yeah.
first one was kind of
Just missed
didn't
completely.
really
Yeah.
work. It kind of made, I think you mentioned it grazed his arm, maybe.
Yeah.
And then the other 3 after the second would have been defective as well, and maybe made that second one, had it not followed the first one that was semi not effective, made
Right.
the gun not work properly. So I found that fascinating, for sure. And to get back to what you were saying, so I found that part extremely interesting because, of course, was Goudreau a lone nut, or was he working part of the as part of a conspiracy? And you go into this. So Garfield's, I guess the guy who warned or tried to warn Garfield was a friend of the Postmaster General, Thomas James. And that
Mm-hmm.
happened on June 29th, 1881, right?
Right.
He tried to warn Garfield. He went to the White House. He was on a carriage ride. He came back. And then he went to the Secret Service agent, or a guard. I don't know if he was
Mm-hmm.
Secret Service, a guard, a White House guard. And you did a lot of good research on him. I think his name is Thomas Pendle.
Right.
And ironically, he had worked in guarding Lincoln as well.
Yeah. Right.
15 or 18 years earlier. Yeah. A little less, 16, 17 years earlier. And you did a bunch of research to figure out which agent would have been on guard for both presidents. And you identified this Thomas Pendle guy, and that's who would have received the warning. But we don't know who the actual quote friend was that made the warning. We just know he was a friend of the Postmaster General and recognized the White House guard. Right? Am I getting that
That's
right?
Mm-hmm. So the thing about this whole story that's, I think, fascinating is that he tries early on in the evening, he tries to go to the White House to warn Garfield, and Garfield wasn't there. So this is so important to tell him. He had to go back and warn him later on in the evening. It's 11 o'clock at night when he's there. Garfield probably wants to go to bed. His mother is probably waiting for him to go to sleep. And he takes him in, and he waits with him he stays with him for over an hour. It's after midnight when he leaves the White House. So he has an hour-long conversation with Garfield, and then he tells the agent of the Secret Service, he just puts it bluntly, someone wants to kill the president. You better be careful right now because it's going to happen soon, and be aware. And he is shot, of course, 3 days later.
Yeah. And I think my last question on this is it actually wasn't a fatal shot, right? But because he had like 10 doctors working on him or something, they actually gave him an infection, and he kind of died a slow death in like September, which was like
very sad.
3 months after in 1881, which is crazy.
If they left him alone, he probably would have survived. I mean, you have one shot. If they would have poured alcohol on the wound, maybe let him just recover, he would have probably recovered in maybe a few months. He was very healthy, president in his 40s, and doctors they kept probing the wound with their dirty fingers over and over again. And
he's only in his 40s.
Yeah, who was very, young president, late 40s. And
wow.
Just would have been a really good president for our country. Really sad.
Yeah, and one of the things that I my actual last question on this is, and I respect this about your research, is you went to the presidential library and looked at all the primary documents regarding the investigation, and he was put on trial, right? Charles Goudreau, and later executed, I believe.
He was hung.
But there were 2 witnesses that said that he had a possible co-conspirator. One of the statements, I think, was a James Denny, you were able to find in the archives, and another one named Thomas Colton, who allegedly saw him with another person acting suspicious, and his witness statement is gone from the archives. You can't find it.
Isn't that crazy? I know. I mean, I went to
Not
the
to us
archives.
JFK guys.
I know. I mean, what the heck? I mean, I read this in another book about the assassination. So I did confirm this on my own about this statement. So that it says essentially that Garfield assassin Guiteau drops off this like package of information, and Denny's a newspaper operator at the Union Pacific Railroad Station. And later on, they detain Guiteau. And this Denny says, that's not the same guy that dropped off the newspaper stuff to me. There's somebody else gave this information to me. The assassin is not the person who gave this to me. So who had all this information that implicates Guiteau? It wasn't him. And then you have this other person, Denny, or was it Colton? Okay, yeah, Colton. So Colton says that Guiteau was in the station with someone else just before the assassination, pacing around with someone. And that statement is in the National Archives, and I went there twice to look for it. And as you were saying, it's gone. It just isn't there. I don't know. I looked. I said, the guy said it should be there, and it's like, well, it isn't. So I don't know what to tell you, but it's not there. But it should be somewhere. But you got these two different weird things that happened that morning about him pacing with someone, and the situation with Denny not confirming the assassin was the one that dropped off the information. So a lot of weird things happening on the day of the assassination. Weird things going on.
Hey, I got a question. We let our super spies ask a question of our guests. And we got a question from one of our big super spies here, Trey. And he was wondering if you had any thoughts. I know this is not presidential related, but on the assassination of Huey Long, if you've ever looked into that.
Louisiana, 1930s, right?
Yeah.
So he was one of these major figures in the Democratic Party, I think, was it? And
probably so back then, yeah.
And he was a reformer at the time. I think he was in, was it Roosevelt's administration in that time period? So
it could have been, yeah, it was pre-World War II, yeah.
I think it was there that time period. He was one of these reformers. Yeah. I don't.
I believe John's freezing up there, Joe.
Yeah, I hear him a little bit. Hopefully it straightens.
Ron, if you can hear us, you froze up. Your Wi-Fi might come back. There you are. I think you're back now. Can you hear us, John?
Still looks a little laggy.
Hey, lose you guys.
Oh, we still got you, but you're frozen and lagging badly. I think you're back now. Can you hear us? Do you have us now, John?
Still looks a little laggy on the video.
Hey, John, if you can hear me, try leaving the studio and following the link back in, and hopefully it'll reset your connection. I don't know if you can hear us at all. Do you have us, John? Can you hear us?
You guys there? I can hear you now.
Okay, good.
Yeah,
I hear you guys. Sorry about
Okay,
that.
good.
That's
No,
all
it's
right.
okay. We've been having a bunch of what we call matrix attacks. Last week we had a guest on. My audio was perfect for like the first hour, and the second hour it completely fell apart. Didn't change settings, so it's just
Yeah, I'm
par
sure
for
the
the course.
CIA, the FBI, the NSA, they all
I
hate
can hear
this
you
show,
guys now.
so-
But that wasn't my fault.
It's okay. No,
They're-
we'll blame
they're
it on
always
the
doing
matrix.
something to us.
No, you sound great now.
Especially me. They always target me.
Yeah, it's the truth seekers that they target. Yeah, that is for sure. But of course, the third section of your book is of President McKinley,
Okay.
who was assassinated on September 6th, 1901, in Buffalo, New York. I believe your hometown, sir?
Yeah, we got a question
That's
here,
my
Joe.
hometown, yes.
Yes.
You
Go
see that
Bills.
question on the screen, John? Is that you? Do you see that question on the screen?
Is John related to John Gottfried Koerner, the grandfather of the Wright brothers? His daughter is Susan, both of whom taught mechanical skills. As far as I know, no. But I can look into it. I'd like to claim
You
that.
never
Wouldn't that be
know.
great?
Go sign up
I
for
should go on one of
Ancestry.
those shows on PBS. I should be the next person. Yeah,
Right.
I'll go on with the next person to go, hey, I'm Wright Brothers connected. They should sign me up for
That'd
it.
be awesome.
As far as I know, I'm not.
Fair enough.
It was a good question, nonetheless.
Yeah.
Yes, you were talking about McKinley.
Our diggers, man, I tell you. So let's get into McKinley next. What year was McKinley assassinated? And Joe, if you want to pop up that pistol.
Let's do it.
Yes. And and again, this might not be the actual gun, an Ivor Johnson 32 caliber revolver.
That's it.
Okay. Nice.
Mm-hmm.
So, give us the background on McKinley and I can't even pronounce this guy's last name, the assassin Leon, which is funny if you're familiar with the JFK
Czolgosz.
thing.
Yeah.
Czolgosz? I would not have gone.
Yeah,
there.
Leon Czolgosz. It's okay. In Buffalo, you know how to pronounce that name, but you're born with knowing how to pronounce Czolgosz. It's just Bills fans, being a Bills fan and knowing the assassin of McKinley. You always know those two things. So, okay, so this happens September 6th, 1901. McKinley is visiting Buffalo toward the Pan American Exposition. The exposition has been going on since May 1st, and he's visiting for President's Day. He actually shows up on September 4th and tours the grounds a little bit. And then the last day he's going to be there is September 6th. And he's going to head back to Washington with his wife, Ida. But that's the culmination of the whole visit. He's at the Temple of Music to greet the public. And Leon Czolgosz is an interesting character. And I look into this situation in my book about could there have been, conspiracy. And I think there are, about three different things that point to involvement from someone else. So he goes in, Czolgosz is in Buffalo. He's there in the summer of 1901 and runs out of money on August 28th. We know this because he can't pay his rent any longer and disappears. No one really knows where he goes and shows back up in Buffalo 3 days later and has stacks of 50s and 100s that he's showing to people. And then he buys this gun with that money and the ammunition for it. So how does this guy who is unemployed get that kind of money from someone that quickly? It doesn't make any sense. He must be funded by someone. Also,
Sounds like Mark David
with
Chapman.
the assassination scene itself. Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. Now, the assassination scene itself, you have many unusual things taking place as well. The official photographer, Charles Dudley Arnold, he follows McKinley everywhere throughout the assassination. He has an all-access pass. He shoots the president when he's at Goat Island. He takes pictures and shoot him. Sorry. He takes pictures of McKinley. at Goat Island, where Niagara Falls is. He follows McKinley different places around his visit. But he's at the Temple of Music, and this you would think would be the money shot for photographers. He reads the public, but he doesn't go inside the Temple of Music to take any pictures. Someone tells me you can't go in there. So if you got pictures of the assassination, you probably have seen what happened when it was going on. But someone tells him can't go in. Even though he had all access pass to take pictures, he was denied entry. Now, the actual assassination scene is also very, very strange. So right in front of Czolgosz is a person the Secret Service calls the Italian. And the Italian is acting very strangely. So he is leaning backwards, and Czolgosz is behind him with kind of the gun in his back, hiding it. And when the Italian gets to McKinley, he takes the president's hand and will not let go for like 20 seconds and turns McKinley. And then Agents Foster and Ireland take the Italian away from the presidents. Czolgosz steps up, blasts 2 shots in the president. And then, the rest is history, as they say. So it does seem like this person in front of him was part of the plan to distract the Secret Service. So Czolgosz should take the clear shots in the McKinley that ended up killing him.
Yeah, a classic.
And that gun, by the way, it's at the Buffalo History Museum. They have it on display. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, it
does seem like
the
it.
way you
Also with
described
the ammunition too. Did you want to ask about that?
No, I'm sorry. Just I was saying.
Go ahead.
Just to finish what you were saying, it was the classic misdirection, right? The mystery Italian guy got the attention of the Secret Service agents, and Leon, I'm not going to pronounce the last name again, kind of uses that opportunity to get 2 shots off, and then in the chaos of the aftermath, the Italian was kind of shuffled out with a lot of the other people. And I think what you're saying in your book is Arnold, the photographer, prevented from entry or possibly having his pictures destroyed. I think that was the other option, was to avoid a possible identity of the quote Italian. It was short mustache, I think.
Kind of looked like Joe.
He could be my great grandfather, and that's going to lead me into a great story you have at a 2013 book signing in Buffalo, where allegedly the great grandson of this mystery Italian came up to you and said it's been a family secret for a long time that my great grandfather was this guy that was creating the diversion. So tell us a little more about that, please, sir.
Yeah, so the book I wrote about this, Secret Plot to Kill McKinley, talks about this, some of the story, but this wasn't in the book. It's in this book, though, the updated version, I guess you could say. So I'm doing a book signing at the Buffalo History Museum, which is part of the exposition. It was a New York State building at the fairgrounds. It's still there. And I'm doing a book signing, and this guy walks up to me, and he says that, he's read my book, and he likes the part about, the Italian, because his great-grandfather was, in fact, this guy, and it was always kept a secret because they felt that he might have been part of the plot, because they felt the same thing. It was very suspicious what he did. He was a Republican at the time in Buffalo. So if you connect the dots, was this part of a plot to install Roosevelt for president? He certainly was from New York State, a governor, a lot of support in Buffalo. Roosevelt Park, he supported his campaign for governor. So you have here, it's a lot to make the leap, but it certainly does look like this person, according to what this person said, he was part of the family and was a Republican, and he said he was part of the plot. So just going with what he said, and that was at a book signing that I was doing for that other book that I wrote. Crazy
Wow.
stuff.
Yeah. And so Theodore Roosevelt was the vice president at that time to McKinley, right?
Hmm. Right.
And his much
Yeah,
like
he was the
LBJ,
governor of New York for that. Yeah.
and much like LBJ and Dallas with Kennedy,
Hmm.
this was his hometown. To make the analogy for the JFK guys, people here. So that's very interesting. And did you ever get any more information on his name? Did you do any more research? Did he give you his name? I don't know if the research is still ongoing. Were you able to make anything of that?
Yeah, he did email me his grandfather's name. Yeah, he gave me his name, and we looked into it a little bit more. And he did say that he was like a ward boss, that at the time, like organizing votes, and pretty well known at the time, that he was counted on just to get the job done. In other words, a person you can rely on for. I'm saying like almost like a mafia would use someone for just getting things done what they needed to get done. But he was a tough old Italian guy, and he said, I guess this is what they needed to do, and we did it.
Here's a question from Josh. Didn't he also have a run-in with anarchist Emma Goldman, who called Zolgash an agent I guess it means provocateur.
Provocateur. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, he read her literature. He'd certainly met her a few different times. Goldman actually toured the exposition grounds that summer, so she was there on the grounds. It's interesting because trying to figure out like how this all happened. You get to the end of August of 1901, and it's clear that Czolgosz wants to kill McKinley. He's making it clear to anyone who wants to listen to him. And the anarchists, they disown him. They say, he's not one of us. We don't want him. And then I mentioned this situation where he leaves Buffalo, comes back, with this ton of cash. Someone gave it to him. So it's a lot to make the leap, but almost like, is he a hired assassin? Does someone can put the blame on, the anarchists, that they're the ones behind this, but in fact, it was someone else, that actually was doing the planning for this, because he's getting his money from somewhere. And there seems to be at the assassination scene, no one wants to see who the Italian was, no pictures of the assassination. That's very strange. And I think these questions need to be answered about what was going on there.
Yeah, for sure. And I did a little math because I have a background in finance. So I think you said he had like a big wad of $50 bills, right? I think you said that. And $50
Right.
in 1901 would have been about $850. So if you think about a big wad, you're like $2,000, $2,000 for someone that couldn't pay his $1.50 boarding. A couple months before, he got an influx of cash, and you got to wonder. It's fascinating. I'm not a McKinley expert. I only know what I've read from your chapter on these books, but seems like there's something more there.
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of money. I mean, he goes and he's like paying for the most expensive alcohol. He's getting the best gun he can buy, and he's paying his room and board in advance when he gets back to Buffalo. And who can give him that kind of money that quickly? I mean, it seems like it's blood money to me to pay him off to do this. Why else would you give him that much money? I think that's what it's for.
Yeah, and you can contrast that too when we get to the Kennedy assassination, with people suddenly coming into a good bit of money. I mean, you've got Jack Ruby, who was apparently in financial trouble, and when he's arrested, he's got $8,000 on him or something like that. And David Ferry is all of a sudden down there buying gas stations and running that. Lauren Hall's buying motels to run, out in California.
DeMoran Shield and getting a payment in Haiti.
Yeah. And one thing that strikes me too is the dichotomy of all these presidential assassins. Because with the first three, I mean, it's pretty. They pretty much got caught red-handed. There's so many witnesses that they had to do it from such a short distance, given the weapons that they were using at the time. And then we get to the Kennedy assassination, and this is the first rifle out of the 4 guns that we see. We also have a potential or accused assassin who doesn't take credit. You know what I mean? He denies that he's the assassin. When these other guys, they're caught red-handed, they have no choice but to admit it. Right. And then, when you get to the Kennedy assassination, you have Oswald who doesn't take credit for it. In fact, he denies it until he's shot. And you could have added a 5th gun if you wanted to add Jack Ruby's gun into this, but I know why you kept it with the presidential assassins. But there's so many other guns that have changed the course of history. It's crazy. But so let's get to the Kennedy assassination with Oswald and the Mannlicher Carcano. Of course, this being a JFK related podcast, we've studied the rifle, where it came from, what kind of gun it was, but just give us a little bit of background about the Mannlicher Carcano and its history as a rifle.
Okay, so can you guys hear me okay? Because I'm getting kind of glitching a little bit.
Yes. Yeah, we can hear you.
Can you hear me okay? Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So the Mannlicher Carcano, the thing about this weapon, you guys probably know about this, not a very good weapon. It's the weapons that were first used with Mussolini's armies in the 1920s and 30s. So many of them are around. They're very much unreliable for a long distance rifle. They're very low velocity weapons. And the one with the Oswald weapon was the scope was defective. Yeah. Yeah, it was a defective scope. It was sighted for a left-handed shooter. Oswald was right-handed. So we have, when there's a paraffin test taken of Oswald, he was tested negative for residue for firing a gun that day. And the gun itself, when the people that first get to the book depository and the sniper's nest, you guys probably know they found a Mauser up there first, and the Carcano was discovered probably later on in the evening. So it seems like other guns were up there, not just the Mannlicher Carcano. And one thing about Oswald himself that I found just fascinating, that I start off the chapter with in the Kennedy assassination section, is the fact that I think it's pretty clear he never shot J.D. Tippit. He never could have. So J.D. Tippit was this Dallas police officer that he gets arrested or allegedly for shooting. Oswald goes to the Texas Theater, and we know he goes in there between 1 o'clock and 1:06 p.m. And we know this because the ticket taker, he saw him go in there at that time. They started the movie War is Hell. And he never left the theater. He goes in there, yeah, and then he gets arrested about 1:50 p.m. And look at the Dallas police records for when Tippit was killed. It's 1:15 p.m. Dies at 1:16. So he never could have shot Tippit. He's in the theater. So that alone, I think, proves that right there we can see his involvement should be questioned just from that alone.
Yeah, I agree. I've always said, so the assassination goes down at 12:31 p.m. And, supposedly Oswald has to make it to the second floor where he's seen drinking a Coke, allegedly. And then at some point he has to make his way out of the depository, walk down the street a couple blocks, and then walk down another street where he supposedly boards a bus. He's on there stuck in traffic for who knows how long. And then he exits a bus and goes to pick up a cab. He has to walk to the Greyhound station to get a cab, to which he then takes back over to Oak Cliff, and he tells the driver to go was it 5 or 7 blocks past his rooming house and let him out. So he has to walk back to his rooming house. Why he does that, that's I don't. But and then he gets to go inside where he changes his clothes, and then he comes back out, and then he's supposed to be walking on foot and somehow make it all the way to the scene of the Tippit shooting within 40 minutes, 35, 40 minutes. I just don't see that happening. He just definitely didn't have time to get there by then. And if you look,
was not there.
Yeah, go ahead.
But please continue. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, and I didn't really realize this until I actually went to Dallas and saw it with my own eyes, like where his rooming house is situated. Zhang's kind of keeps running down to the left, and then you can make that another left onto Jefferson, and the theater is like a couple blocks down on the left. It's very close to his rooming house, which makes me think that if the Tippit shooting, I don't think he had anything to do with the Tippit shooting, but he wouldn't have taken the route he was going if his destination was ultimately the Texas theater, because he would have been going in the long route, if you will. And he just didn't have a reason to do that. And like you said, Butch Burris saw him going in, and apparently there was something with Julia Postal, who was the ticket taker. Later on, she had like a nervous breakdown and was crying because, people think that she was kind of coerced into saying that she didn't see Oswald go in, but when he actually really paid for a ticket. But that's a whole different story.
Yeah, and you have the whole situation you mentioned about at the crime scene, where he's allegedly, at the top floor shooting at the president, and he allegedly goes down the back staircase. The two witnesses there never see him. Victoria Adams, one of them, and he never could have made it down all those flights of stairs and not be out of breath having his lunch. So the whole situation with him even being in a position to shoot was not even possible. So yeah, it does seem like he was with both of the shootings there that day, not responsible for either one of them, with Tippit and with Kennedy.
Yeah, we had this guy Gavin McMahon. He's a researcher from Australia, actually, and he came on. He's been looking into the Tippit shooting, and one of the witnesses, Joe, what was her name?
Markham?
Yeah, Helen Markham. Apparently she had some like teenage sons that were troublemakers in like these little gangs or whatever they were back then, with the Jets or
I think it was the 10th Street Gang.
10th Street Gang or whatever. But yeah, he was saying that, more than likely that these guys were involved. They were getting in trouble with the law and selling drugs and just being, tough guys back then, or, burglaries, smash and grab, stuff like that, fighting, just bad kids. And that more than likely that they might have been involved, but who knows, because there's like 15 witnesses to the Tippit shooting.
Who knows? I mean, yeah, go ahead. I'll say it wasn't Oswald. Yeah.
And I think that's where Rob and I are as well at this point. But so you have Booth, who was executed, right?
Allegedly.
Allegedly. You have,
if we believe he didn't escape, yeah.
Right. Gautreaux and Leon, I'm not going to try to, who shot McKinley, also executed, and Oswald also executed, right, but in a different manner, right?
Right.
And but the other three were stalking the subjects, as you point out in your book, for You like with Booth, the kidnapping plot before that, and you know, these people had documented, like they were not like a documented. They did not like the president, right? They were like they hated them, they wanted to kill them. But in terms of Oswald, you have a Marxist, allegedly, right, killing a very liberal president, right? So I think that's the one that really stands out when I compare all four. I think the other three definitely ideological, right? Booth was upset about the Civil War, and I think Lee surrendered to Grant like 5 days before Lincoln was shot, which I didn't realize till I read your book. I didn't realize it was that close, and it's fascinating to think of, like, why would Oswald do that, and then why would he not take credit for it? Because the other three did take credit in a sense, right, or admit to it. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, the other three they definitely took credit for it. So you knew that they were, at least they were the ones, if not others, involved with the assassinations. Yeah. And all three of them with, you know, it just seemed like the motives were pretty clear, but it doesn't seem that it was clear at all. Like with Oswald, there's no clear motive at all for him. And I think that also shows why he wasn't the assassin. So he had no motive to want to shoot Kennedy.
Yeah, for sure. And, you know, I thought of when I was reading this book, and one of the, you know, I was looking for common denominators, right? Like, what is the common denominator of these four presidents being killed? And the best that I can come up with was that all four of them were trying to make extreme change, right? And got killed in the process, whether it was Garfield trying to give civil war rights or civil rights to African Americans, to Lincoln, obviously there, and McKinley. And it's interesting because McKinley, there's a common denominator in terms of Cuba, right? He was trying to make Cuba a democracy in 1901 or 1900 or somewhat close to that. And of course, obviously, Cuba was a big factor in the JFK assassination, at least what Rob and I believe. And
yeah.
So, and that brings us to Trump. And I don't want to get into Trump too much because we piss off either side when we get to this. But, you know, he's had a couple assassination attempts recently. And whether you like Trump, whether you hate Trump, he's someone that's trying to make a type of change. And I see a pattern here. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Then we could start off with Lincoln assassination. I mean, I really think that if he had been able to live through his second term, he would have been able to a lot of just amazing things for our country to heal our nation after the Civil War was over. I think he made it very clear in his last speech to the country in April of 1865 that he talked about something called the Louisiana Plan, where every southern state was going to have equal rights, citizenship, voting rights, and he wanted that to be the vision: voting rights for former slaves so they can vote. Those are the ones that were, you know, in the military. I think he would have destroyed the Ku Klux Klan. He would make sure that never would have existed. He would have made sure a Civil Rights Act would have been passed and enforced. I think he would have seen our country with a new birth of freedom. We talked about the Gettysburg Address. I think it would have made that. I mean, his focus for his second, I'll say, with Garfield and his, he mentioned this with his emphasis on civil rights. He was looking forward to making a huge emphasis on this for his administration. He was going to do a speech on it in Georgia in October, and his whole cabinet was just focused on trying to get the country back to Reconstruction, which had ended in the administration of Hayes. and he was hopefully going to be one of our great presidents. And then with McKinley, you mentioned with Cuba, he had looked forward to a time when that would be an independent country, a democracy. And if they go forward with that plan, there's no Fidel Castro in the 1950s, that would have never happened. They would have developed for, a good 50, 60 years with our support.
No bad pigs either, which could have changed the Kennedy assassination. I mean, it might not have ever happened because of that, because of everything involved with the Bay of Pigs and the CIA and, pissed off anti-Castro Cubans, exiled Cubans. The assassination possibly could have never happened. So it definitely could have changed history. And if Kennedy hadn't have died, I think you would have seen a very different succession. Even presidents after him, you would never have had Johnson as a president or Nixon likely. And things could be totally different. I think in the novel, and I think in the miniseries, Stephen King's November 22nd, 1963, or 11/22/63, he posits this, and there's even a scene in the film about the future being worse if Kennedy hadn't been killed, which is an odd take, I thought. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, and another thing that is constant between the four that you point out in your book is obviously the Secret Service incompetence and the guy Parker going out for drinks during the intermission at the Ford Theater, and Garfield. I think that was more of the doctors, but also had warnings 3 days before allegedly. There were Secret Service failures in each of those situations, and that's one of the things I kind of put together from reading all four sections of the book. Can you hear us?
Yeah, I think you look at all of them, all four of them really, for every one of the assassinations. And even just want to mention with the Kennedy assassination that I did some research about if you can survive a throat wound. And you look at the way the assassination goes down, the first shot, JFK reacts to it, misses the car completely. And then the second shot, at that point, they should have reacted to it. 2 shots have already been fired, and there's no reaction from Hill or Reedy. We're right behind him. So if they get to the car, then when he's shot in the throat, he could have survived it because there's no paralysis. He has his arms up. He's not bleeding. And George Orwell got shot in the throat in the Spanish-American War and survived it in the 1930s. So if he gets, at that point, if he is saved, he could survive the assassination after the second shot. But there's still no reaction. Like, if you had a quick reaction from Reedy and from Hill when he got the throat wound, he could have survived the shooting. But they didn't react because the night before they're at Jack Ruby's club drinking till 2:00 in the morning, and that I think was what impaired their reaction time when it came time to be, what they needed to do, quick reactions, but just didn't happen. They were too late to the car by then.
Yeah, and the driver didn't step on it either when he should have, for sure.
Yeah, or the Secret Service agent in the passenger seat, right? He just kind of looked. I'm blanking on his name. He turned around. The chat will correct us. He turned around, kind of looked. I'm sorry,
Kellerman.
Yes, and he didn't really do anything either. He just kind of looked around. And granted, Kennedy was like 2 rows back at that point, but Clint Hill only reacted when kind of Jackie kind of climbed on the back of the limousine to try to grab part of JFK's brain. He could have reacted much quicker, as we could say that of a lot of agents. So, and I think we lost you there for a second, John. We were just saying, following up on your point on how Clint Hill reacted very slowly, only when Jackie, kind of went back on the car or to try to retrieve whatever she was trying to retrieve, and Kellerman, and the reaction was super slow, and that's consistent, kind of through all four. Although in the McKinley it was kind of a diversion, but you could argue shots from the back were a diversion or whatever. But there were failures in all four circumstances for sure.
Yeah, it does seem like with these situations, the presidents needed their action time to be quick, and they just Parker was not in the box. Garfield was completely unprotected. McKinley agents Foster and Ireland, they fell for the ruse, and JFK's agents were slow to react because they were the night before drinking Jack Ruby's club. There's a story about that too. Abraham Bolden, the African American agent that JFK, he appoints to his protection. He talked about this. He exposed the truth about it, and he got ostracized and indicted for bribery, which he never did. He got pardoned just last year by President Biden, and he's been exonerated for anything that he ever did anything wrong. But he exposed all that information about the agents being drunk the night before and being slow to react, and when they needed the most help that they could get, and they of course didn't. They failed him when they needed him the most. So sad.
Yep, and John, we had a comment here. I'm guessing it's no relation. Let me pop it up here. So Gustav Koerner went home after he heard Lincoln's assassination, and his wife Sophie remarked she grew pale, trembled, and exclaimed, "That was the shot we heard last night." And he follows it up with this comment about I know you're interested in the supernatural as well, which is definitely cool. And apparently, she had some kind of a supernatural experience concerning the assassination of Lincoln. And funny, I saw you've written the book Haunted Rochester as well, and you're a big promoter of tours and walks and haunted things. And just a couple weeks ago, I took a haunted tour of Shepherdstown, West Virginia. And it's the first ever haunted tour I've ever done. And we went to a couple graveyards and stuff, and the lady that was giving it was all dressed up from period clothes and telling us all the stories, because this little town of Shepherdstown's situated maybe a mile or two from the Battle of Antietam, which was the bloodiest, Civil War battle. And she was, the streets were just soaked in blood, 20,000 injured and coming through there. And there was all kinds of ghost stories, which I thought was really cool. So I would recommend anybody, if you got a haunted tour thing in your town and you have some kind of history or historical significance in your town, do something fun, get out. It's a cool date night kind of thing. You can go out to dinner and go on a haunted walk tour, whatever. And I had a lot of fun. And I know you're a big promoter of that as well.
Actually, I have my own ghost walk company. Yeah, I do tours. I've done this for about 10 years or so in the Western New York area. And they're based off of research I've done about paranormal events, in Brockport, Buffalo, Western New York. I have actually a story about Antietam I could just quickly share about that connects to one of the stories that I do there in Buffalo. So it was September, I think it was 22nd, 1862, Lincoln signs the Emancipation Proclamation. And that day in Brockport, 113 dead fish showed up in the canal there. And just, I guess it was about 3 days before in Antietam, 113 men from Brockport died during the Battle of Antietam that served our country. So they had 113 dead fish, 113 dead soldiers, and they showed up the same day Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation. So Brockport has this kind of spooky, unusual event that takes place during that time when Lincoln signs that proclamation that freed the slaves. So I have that tour. We go out and we do this every October, and we have a lot of spooky things that happen, and we talk about that and other events that take place in our paranormal history in Western New York. So yeah, we do that in October.
Oh, well, I'm not that far from you, John. I was born in Westchester, New York. Sleepy Hollow. I know it has some lore to it. I'm in Connecticut now,
nice.
Right on the border of New York. But I go up to the Catskills a lot, and I've been up. My cousin lives in Syracuse, so hey, I might come do that. That sounds fun. I love all that stuff. So
yeah, it's all fun to talk about. Actually, Irving, he visited Buffalo in the 1830s. He took the canal, and Washington was actually one of the famous ghost ships that disappeared in the 1830s, named after him. So he has a little connection that's very kind of spooky for Buffalo too. So yeah, he always shows up. We at least expect him in different places.
Nice. Well, John, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And again, folks, you can find everything, all the books that he's written down below in the description. There's an Amazon link where you can purchase any of his books if you're interested. He's done a lot of different topics as well. Something about JFK Jr., which I'm sure some of our viewers might be interested in as well. Of course. So definitely check him out.
Yeah.
John, we end every show here. I don't know if are you familiar with Dean Andrews from the JFK story, the lawyer down in New Orleans?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, he's our buddy on this.
The relatively larger guy that was supposed to be Oswald's lawyer and played by John Candy in the movie. Yeah.
Legendary.
Told him to go to Dallas. Yeah. Well, he's our buddy, man. We use him to end our show all the time. And it's just like a minute thing, and then our show ends. But Joe, if you'd like to say something, go ahead before we sign off here.
Sure. So I read the whole book, The Four Guns, this week, and I learned so much. It's so intriguing. If you like the Kennedy assassination, the other 3 chapters on or portions, not chapters because they're multi-chapters, of Lincoln and Garfield and McKinley. It's a wealth of knowledge, and I'm so happy I read the book. I'm so happy you came on. I learned a lot. I learned, and it's all about, for me, patterns, right? What is consistent in all these 4, what's not consistent, and what can we kind of glean from that? And I learned a lot, and I suggest all of our followers buy John's book, and the link will be in the description. It's a great read, fascinating. So thank you so much, John.
You guys are very gracious. Thank you for having me, and it's been a lot of fun talking to you guys. You guys are so much fun. You're just a riot. It's been so much fun talking to you guys. It's been a lot of fun. I just had a pleasure, and it's been my pleasure to be on the show. Thank you so much, guys.
Good, man. We'll have to have you back on sometime and follow up and maybe get into some other things as well with you.
Yeah. So now we'll dance it out to Dino.
That'd be great.
And thank you again, John, for hanging out with us. Thank you to our wonderful listeners and supporters. Tiny Dancer is a new covert operator for us. Yes. And thank you to John for your super chat. We didn't miss it. And without further ado, here is Mr. Dean Andrews to dance us out of here. We'll see you next week, folks. Thanks for hanging. And enjoy Dino.
Parish prison. He dare not talk for the record, but he said, "Come to Bourbon Street and I'll show you what I think of the case." greatest lies are told in the name of truth. The greatest crimes are committed in the name of justice. The quotation is Jim Garrison's. It could be used for him or against him in this strange case. Good night.
Thank you, John.
I was dancing too.